This is RJ Eskow, and we're back on Take Action News, and we're going to talk a little bit about the budget with Ross Eisenbey, who is Vice President of the Economic Policy Institute and someone who understands these issues as well as anybody I know. Ross, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
In a way, I feel guilty, Ross. I feel like I should apologize to you because we go through this aggravating process over and over between the annual budgets and the threats and the shutdowns and the debt ceiling limits and all of that. And so, number one, I feel like I'm forcing you to relive a trauma that we all go through. And number two, like anybody who's a smart economist, you know how insane it is to keep focusing on variations in intensities of austerity, or I believe you do. I don't want to speak for you, at a time when we could be doing so much more to improve the economy through other means. So first of all, accept my apologies, along with my thanks for joining us today.
Well, and thank you. I follow your blog, and you've been, you've been way out front pushing against austerity, and it's absolutely the right thing to be doing, and I'm grateful for it.
Well, thank you so much. It's very kind of you. Now, and obviously the reason why I wanted to talk to you is that, there's so much that can be said about the budget, but we're going into another round of negotiations. The president will introduce his budget. I believe he said beginning of March. We're already seeing discussion about the debt ceiling negotiations, and I don't think of you as someone who's an insider in the machinations on the Hill and all of that. But I guess my first question for you would be, just from what you're hearing in the economics community and the dialogue, are we in for another round of perhaps austerity light coming out of this? Will anybody be arguing forcefully for the kind of interventions and Keynesian actions we need, or is that the wrong question to be asking you?
Well, the budget deal is pretty much set by what they did in December. I think it's unlikely they're going to renegotiate that, but the president should still come out and say what the right thing to do is. That even if they've agreed to a very austere budget for the next couple of years, and even for the next 10 in theory, they should be talking about what the nation really needs. And what we need more than anything are, of course, jobs, which we have this huge deficit. We're about 8 million jobs lower than we should be, taking into account population growth since the Great Recession. We've had this slow, very low level of 100,000, 150,000 new jobs a month when we should be adding 250,000 or 300,000 jobs a month. So that should be the first focus of everybody in government, is how to spur job creation, and that's to deal with the problem that we have right now. But it's also a way to deal with problems that we'll have in the future. If we don't do something about our infrastructure, we are going to have a much harder time competing, transporting ourselves, within the United States. Just daily life is going to be harder if we don't tackle all of the infrastructure problems that we have, from roads and bridges and trains and ports to the energy infrastructure and the electrical grid.
And of course, there's a cost associated with not repairing these things as well.
They'll have to be fixed sometime. Would you rather plan in advance or wait for disaster? And
decaying roads lead to decay. Right.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes I say, and I'm not sure this is wise or accurate of me, but sometimes I describe the problem as a two-economy problem, that there is a recovery underway for the stock market, for corporate profits, for people whose livelihood depends more on investment income and so on. And yet there are still 8 million people in search of work. There's still the measure that includes underemployment as well as unemployment is still very high. So people who want to work full-time can't. There's wage stagnation. Why is this, this is something that poll after poll shows that the American people are upset about. Is there a legitimate economic philosophy anymore for not doing something about these problems?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, almost all Americans would say we want an economy that helps the maximum number of people, that it's not designed to be an economy that helps a narrow slice at the top. The way we measure its performance is, at the very least, by looking at the middle of the American income ladder and wealth ladder and saying that those people should be doing better, not worse. Each year, that's how we should be measuring our success. And in fact, families at the middle, at the median, are worse off than they were in 2000. They've lost thousands of dollars in annual income. Their wealth is down. The economy is not performing for them, and so I would say no. It's not a measure of any kind of success that we have a stock market that's doubled since the crash if it leaves behind the vast majority of people.
All right, let me ask you then a question. It's an alternate history question. In my alternate history universe, Treasury Secretary Ross Eisenbey, currently of the Economic Policy Institute, but Treasury Secretary in this alternate universe, for a populist Congress, a populist Senate, is asked, what can we do? What do we do to make this situation better? What would the right steps be in this alternate universe?
There are so many things that we could do. I mean, there are the little things that are right in front of the Congress right now, like extending unemployment insurance benefits for the long-term unemployed. That would create, this is, as I say, this is a small thing. It would help create or support about 300,000 jobs instead of seeing them wiped out over the course of this year. But the big things are we would deal with our trade deficit. The president, unfortunately, always talks about increasing exports, but he doesn't talk about net exports. And we have to do something about the flood of foreign goods that are subsidized by governments like China through their currency. And the Treasury Secretary is in the perfect place to do that, to say, we will not tolerate currency manipulation that makes our exports more expensive and makes imports cheaper, and we will impose a tariff or take other actions to prevent that from happening. We could create millions of jobs by doing that and help our budget deficit at the same time. So if I were Treasury Secretary, that would be number one. But we would make huge investments in infrastructure. I think we could increase the level of spending on roads, bridges, and transportation infrastructure by 50%, and put a lot of construction workers back to work while we do it. We still have more than 1 million construction workers unemployed. So that would be way up near the top. But in my world, if I were not just Treasury Secretary, but put me in charge of national economic policy altogether, I would say we need a full employment policy that makes the federal government the employer of last resort, so that we would not tolerate in Detroit that unemployment is in double digits with so many people who have dropped out of the labor force. Half as many people today are employed in Detroit as were in 2000. We need to provide jobs.
I'm sorry to jump in, Ross, but here's the remarkable thing, in my opinion, when you mention Detroit and employment, is that I think almost everybody agrees that the U.S. government intervention in the auto industry was the right thing to do, that it was successful.
Yep.
Why wouldn't we replicate that model? Because among other things, when you guarantee a job, especially in an economy like this, when the government invests, there's a multiplier effect that creates other jobs outside that the government doesn't have to subsidize and so on. Why wouldn't that become standard operating procedure for any industry in any region of the country that's struggling right now?
Well, you have to look. I guess I would say you have to look at each one individually and make a determination what has to be done. But the auto industry, as you say, was a total success of the Obama administration, that we would have lost, I think, 1.5 million or 2 million jobs if the government hadn't intervened the way it did. And it's been a tremendous success. So, yes, we should be looking at other industries, at textiles, at industries where we still have manufacturing here that could be built up if it were supported. Yes, I agree with you.
Well, I'm delighted that we agree, and I didn't mean to slip past, I think, what was perhaps the most important of the many important things you said, which was that the government should be the employer of last resort, and that it's unacceptable to allow regions like Detroit to fall into this form of decay. Ross Eisenbey is Vice President of the Economic Policy Institute. Ross, thanks so much for joining us.
It was my pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. Now, this is R.J. Eskow with Take Action News, and in the segment that's coming up, we'll be talking with Maya Rockeymoore about the State of the Union budget, where much will be said about inequality. Please stick with us. I'm R.J. Eskow. We'll be right back.